Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Pat Flynn, and I am here with John DeRosa. And this is a jointly hosted podcast that will appear on Philosophy for the People and the excellent, the exquisite, the magnificent Classical Theism podcast, hosted by my good friend John. Every week, or just about every week, John and I, we hop on the phone and we just talk about what's happening in our lives. And we have a friendly chat. It often gets philosophical. We call it office hours. And very frequently, a lot of ideas come up in these just friendly conversations, and we say, you know what, we need to podcast on that. We need to do an episode on that. And unfortunately, we don't do that nearly as much as we could or we should. But here is one instance of when we're actually going to do that. So, John, always a delight to have you here. What are we talking about today, by the way?
Pat Flynn, thank you so much for bringing me on again. This is great to be with you for another rendition of Office Hours. We've done about, I think, 3 so far, maybe 4. But no, I'm with you. We really should do more of them. But today, this came up. We're calling it Office Hours Confirmation Class Questions because we're both dealing with students who are preparing for confirmation. I work with some 9th graders and some 8th graders, and I know you do at your church. And that age, they want to engage the faith. You know, intellectually, they have a lot of
10th
questions.
graders for me, by the way, in Wisconsin is 10th grade.
I'm sorry, 10th grade. Okay, sorry. Yes, I should have clarified that beforehand. So in New Jersey here, it's usually 9th grade, but I know that varies. And we're talking about students, who are, 8th grade to 10th grade, 9th grade. They're in high school. They're engaging subjects at a deep level, and they often have a lot of great questions. So what we're doing here is we're taking 5 questions that came from one of your confirmation students, and we're just going to kind of discuss how we can handle this from a Catholic Christian worldview. So I'm pretty pumped about it. I think I'll lay out the 5 questions in a little bit, but I know at the beginning we wanted to do a little bit of stage setting. So do you want to tell the audience just a little bit more of how these questions came about or how you plan to approach them?
Yeah, these questions are from one of my confirmation students. Very intelligent guy. He's sort of on the fence a little bit. I think he is, I guess, broadly agnostic. He said specifically he's not an atheist, but he has some barriers, right, and legitimate barriers. And his name's Stuart. I don't think he would mind me mentioning it. He actually has a podcast of his own. And God bless the kid. He actually reminds me a lot of myself. And I hope he doesn't find that as insulting back in the day. But just very inquisitive, really seems to sort of march to the beat of his own drum in a cool way. And in fact, he is a drummer, so that's quite fitting. And he's thinking deeply about things. And he has his questions are sincere, they're honest. And he strikes me, and this is part of the reason I wanted to do this, John. I think this is important for apologetics and just, anything, right, is trying to gauge where somebody is coming from. And when somebody is coming from a position of honest sincerity, like, hey, I don't have a bias here. I don't hate religion or anything like that. But these are just legitimate barriers for me, struggles that I have. I want to say that we have a duty to try and clear those barriers for people. Now, there are instances, we're all familiar with them, right, where somebody might present objections as if they're legitimate barriers, but really they're just they're just committed, no matter what, against the religious position. So these are sort of just rationalizations or excuses. That's not to say they're bad objections, but somebody's coming from maybe a more emotionally motivated position. And in that instance, I'm not saying you shouldn't address the objections or questions, but oftentimes, and I think we've both found ourselves in this situation, I certainly have, right? It could be a little futile. I think sometimes maybe it's better just to talk about the football game for a while, try and build a relationship with somebody, get them to see that they can actually trust you and hopefully like you and build a friendship. And then once the friendship is there, then maybe you can have some honest, productive dialogue, whereas before there would just probably be more heat than light. So all that is to say, I see these questions as good questions, legitimately good questions, coming from a sincere perspective. And that was what motivated me to want to put them up for conversation today. Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's fantastic. I'm just going to run through the 5 questions real quick, and then I want to give another remark, and then I know we want to make a couple of stage-setting comments, but just so the audience knows where we're headed, we're going to kind of take these in the order from, I thought, more the easier questions to answer, but also then up to the more difficult one. So question 1 was, why create an entire universe for only one planet of life and wait 13 billion years to do so? Question 2, why did Jesus ask his disciples to leave their families behind? Particularly the apostles, why not select people without a duty to their spouse? Question 3, sure, the church isn't perfect, but they started hundreds of wars based on religion and killed many dissidents of the faith. It seems pretty egregious. Question 4, why wait 280,000-ish years to send Jesus into the world and not spread the gospel earlier? And why not spread his chosen people? Why not spread Judaism outside of Israel? That's the other nature of the question. And then question 5, why torture people for all eternity in hell when God could just not create hell? So I thought these, additionally, Pat, I want to say with you that these are 5 excellent questions as well that are theological in nature. And the other comment I wanted to make at the outset is that there was a time, and it still lingers on, where the church has done a horrible job of answering these questions at the parish level or getting out the Catholic intellectual tradition and getting those answers to the faithful. For a lot of years, decades, in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, and Bishop Barron talks about this, we truly dumbed down the faith and just only emphasized the spiritual side. And when people had these types of intellectual questions and objections, they weren't told like, oh, that's a good question, let's dig into what Augustine and Aquinas had to say and see what we uncover. No, that's not what they were told. They were told, oh, just have faith and try not to think too much about it. I mean, anybody who think that's a good answer has not spent enough time with young people. I got a quick quote here from Carlo Broussard, our good friend Carlo Broussard, in a recent Catholic Answers magazine article. And he says, quote, after I've given a talk on apologetics, the parents or grandparents of millennials often say to me something like this, quote, that would have been great for my son or grandson, but I don't really need that apologetic stuff. I just have faith, end quote. Chances are they've probably said the same thing to their son or grandson, but this sort of response validates what slogans claim that, quote, I believe because thinking is hard. And young people aren't going to want anything to do with it. No young adult wants to be part of an anti-intellectual crowd. And so that's from Carlo Broussard. I think he hits the nail on the head. And I think what we're trying to do here on both of our podcasts, Philosophy of the People, For the People, and Classical Theism podcast, is bring that Catholic intellectual tradition to bear on these questions, which are great questions. And theological questions shouldn't be dismissed with a just have faith attitude. They should be engaged with theology. So I want to commend the person for asking those questions, and I wanted to get that on the table first.
Yeah, amen, brother. So let's do a little bit of stage setting, then we'll go in. So there's just a couple of principles I want to lay out. I think these are just principles that will help you to get more truth in life, and they're also principles that will help you to not allow questions to turn into objections when questions don't need to be objections, right? And I think that's why that matters should become clear as we move forward. So the first principle, it's not original to me. I've heard other philosophers advocate for it, particularly Josh Rasmussen, but I call it the flashlight principle. And the idea of the flashlight principle is this: hey, we can know some things, right? We might not be able to know everything, but we can know some things. And I want to even claim that we can know some things about God. And if that's the case, then we should always kind of take what we know to shine light on what we don't know. Always first try to separate what is clear to me by reason, by the light of reason, from what is not clear by the light of reason. And can I use what is clear to help illuminate in some way what is unclear? And I think if you get this principle, and if you get clarity on certain things that I think you really can know by reason, it will actually do a lot in a general way to alleviate a lot of the tension that is felt in these questions. Now, this is an important thing because these could be seen as just sincere questions, and maybe they're just questions, right? But a lot of times in the way they're presented, they're sort of more objections. There's sort of hidden objections in here that John and I are going to try and unpack. But minimally, I would say, just to give an example of what I mean, right? So say that you can know that something is the case without knowing how or why something is the case. So for example, you can know that somebody loves you without knowing how or why they love you. I mean, take my wife, Christine. I have great evidence that she loves me. She sacrifices for me. She's borne my children. She puts up with my annoying rate and tone of voice all the time, right? And in fact, the latter makes it really kind of hard to understand how she could love me, right? Like this would be a mystery. How could you love something like this, right? But she does. So I can know that without knowing how or why. Like the why could remain completely mysterious. Now I could, try and flatter myself and maybe give some reasons, but maybe I'm just getting a ton of love letters from somebody totally mysterious, right? And there's just tons of evidence that somebody really does love me, but I have no idea how or why? That's an important thing. You can know that without knowing how or why. How does this apply to what we're going to get into? Well, I think that you can know that God exists and not know many of the reasons why God did things one way or another. So, for example, I think that there's sort of, when we confront reality, we're faced with contingent being. John, we've talked about this many times. There's just things out there that don't carry the reason for their existence intrinsic to themselves. And I want to say that sort of contingency logically demands necessity. Contingent being sort of logically demands a sort of necessary being. And the only thing that I think that can sort of satisfy what a necessary being is would be God, a being of pure actuality that's utterly simple, non-composite, eternal, immutable, all the things that we know and love as classical theists, right? That to me seems clear by reason. Contingent being seems undeniable. And the logical connections from there to God's existence, I think, are clear by reason. I can know that God exists through good philosophy. I think I can also know that when we sort of contemplate and conceptually unpack the nature of pure actuality, we get the traditional divine attributes as well, such as omnipotence, omniscience, perfect goodness, so on and so forth, right? How does the flashlight principle work here? Well, it can say something like this, right? You can know that God exists and that God is perfectly good and wise. And that should be enough to tell you that whatever God's reasons are for doing anything, they have to be good, right? There has to be reasons there. And in fact, they have to be the most excellent of reasons. And if that's the case, if you can know that's the case, then you don't have to know why God, quote unquote, waited about 13 billion years to I guess, usher in humanity or whatever. But so you can have no idea what exactly the reason for that was, but still know that there is a good reason for it. So the principle is doing this, right? It's saying this. Not here's a simple but confusing sentence. Not seeing is not seeing not. Not seeing is not seeing not, right? So just because I don't see that there is a reason doesn't mean that I see that there is no reason. And in fact, if I go back to what is clear, I can see that there is and must be a reason, and it has to be an excellent reason, even if I don't see what the reason is. That to me is how to be rational on questions like this that are difficult and good questions. Go to what you can know first. And I want to say, but I'm not going to get into it now, that you can know that God exists and has these traditional divine attributes. And if you can find clarity there and security there, then you can use that to just sort of shine a light or at least alleviate the tension so that these questions are no longer objections. And at worst, they're just mysteries. And that might be as far as you can go on some of these things, but that's okay. We can live with mystery. Tensions and objections, we kind of want to alleviate those, but mystery, I think we're okay. How's that, John? Is that
no? I think that is a great statement of the flashlight principle, and I like that phrase that you've been using on your podcast. I forget when you first said it, but I remember I just tagged it in my mind. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. When you can shift from a philosophical doubt or objection and push something into the realm of a theological mystery, it's no longer eating at you that this is something that can't possibly be true, but it's been pushed into the realm of, oh, well, I already have good reasons to hold that God exists, that Jesus is Lord, that he founded the church. And so I know there must be a reason for this other item. I just may not see what it is. I think that's a good point. Another thing that occurred to me as you were laying out that principle is that we like to kind of categorize different objections. Objections can be made against the truth of the faith. So if you're arguing against the truth that God exists, you might be presenting something like a problem of evil or the incoherence of certain attributes going together. That's not what these questions are. You might also make objections against not the truth of belief, but some other defective aspect of it. So this is like classic Marx or Freud when they say religion is the opiate of the masses, or it's just childish, wishful thinking. These are not necessarily saying that it's false, but they're pointing to what they perceive as other defective aspects of belief. And Plantinga makes a distinction between these two, like objections against the truth versus objections against another defective aspect, and he calls them de facto objections and de jure objections. But these are not either of those. Then there's like a third level, which I would just call theological questions. Mm-hmm. Theological questions, they're not arguments against the existence of God or against Jesus, founding the church, but they raise these curiosities or qualms or reservations that we have about the particulars of God interacting in the world. And I like what you were kind of leaning into there, where yes, we're not always going to understand all the reasons, because when we're dealing with God, the transcendent, perfect, simple foundation of all that there is, some of the divine rationale is just going to be opaque to us because we're limited creatures. And
Right.
he's the unlimited God. So we shouldn't be surprised. Our worldview almost predicts that in some cases, we're going to just have mysteries, but we're never going to have to embrace contradictions. And we're always going to be able to respond to the objections and the difficulties as far as we can, but we're never going to be able to answer all the questions for ourselves, because the only one who searches God and knows God is God himself, like the Holy
Mhm.
Spirit in the New Testament. So I
Yeah.
think those are some great kind of stage setting remarks to get us going here. And I agree wholeheartedly with the flashlight principle.
Yeah, beautiful. I just want to reiterate that the theistic worldview predicts mystery, right? Because we're finite beings. So should we expect to see everything? Should we expect? No, of course not, right? God is going to have God-sized reasons that we cannot possibly wrap our mind around. Now, at the same time, while that should encourage humility, I think we should still take a posture of curiosity and investigation, because we can definitely still know some things. I want to say the things we can know are going to be really helpful in this context and situation. So very good. Yeah.
Yes,
Awesome.
and if anyone ever has, if they're presenting a stronger objection, that's why we're going to try to mine out of these
Mhm.
sometimes the objection that might be lurking behind the question.
Mhm.
Because if the objection is against the truth of a certain aspect of the faith, or attempts to show a contradiction in the worldview, we're not all about like, oh, well, just don't look at that and don't worry about it. We're like, no, let's try to answer this as far as we can. In some cases, we might just have to offer a plausible model of how these might go together without being absolutely certain that this is the way. But
Mhm.
we can have confidence, and when you've done this enough times, you'll gain that confidence that you will be able to remove the harsh difficulties. You're not going to have no mysteries, but you'll be able to quarantine them in a realm that's appropriate to the life of a believer. So let's get into the first question
Yeah.
here, Pat, and then we'll just kind of work through again from the least up to the greatest. Or did you want to add one more remark before?
No, I just want to clarify tensions versus
Yeah,
contradictions,
yeah.
right? So tensions often, yeah. How do we think about tensions? Well, we often think of sort of the coherence of a theory, and the coherence is sort of how well do all the pieces fit together, right? We like when things are just really fit really well together. A tension is when we don't really see how the pieces fit together, and we think that it might be tough for them to fit together. That's not the end of the world. Every theory has tensions, right? Contradiction is like the worst form of tension. That's when you
Mhm.
see that they absolutely do not fit together. So contradictions, you're right. Those, if there's like a threat of a contradiction, those need to be addressed. If we can get it to at least, just a tension or a puzzle mystery, that's better. And of course, naturally we want to try and resolve things as far as we can, but we can live with tensions to an extent, and tensions come in degrees. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and it's
So
worth pointing out that no worldview has no tensions. So it's
yes.
not like you jump the ship from Catholic Christianity, or you go over, so I'm going to go over to the worldview that has no tensions. Like, doesn't
Totally
exist.
seem, yeah, good
Yeah,
luck, friends. Yeah, right. Right.
right.
So first question. This is the one essentially. Well, why did God wait as long as he did to create humanity, right? And why use the time scale that God, it seems so long, right? And
Yeah,
I
and I
think
like the way it was phrased in a more pointed way. Why create an entire universe for only one planet of life and wait 13 billion years to do so?
yeah.
And we
So
might have to check the numbers. Actually, I think so. I think the Earth is often dated to 4.5 billion years
billion, right?
for
Yeah.
the Earth, but like the universe, 13 billion. Needless to say, these are
It's
huge
a long
numbers.
time, right? So yeah, we don't have to worry about the specifics on this, because I think the hidden objection is something like this, and you can tell me if you think this is right, and Stuart can confirm if he wants, right? It's like, this just seems kind of a weird and irrational way to do things. It seems like the really interesting stuff, namely humanity and salvation history, you took a really long time to get along to that. And who's got time for that? Even God, right? Who's got 13 billion years, right? And like, yeah, sure, some cool stuff came before, but the really interesting stuff, right? Who's got time for that? I think the objection is something like that. That seems a sort of a rational or weird way to create. Do you think that's what's kind of lurking beneath the surface there, John?
Yes, I think the irrationality or weirdness of doing it in that manner, or that it might be problematic. Why did he need so long if he really is so powerful? Maybe there's that kind of question lurking behind it as well.
Yeah. So let's remember we keep the flashlight in hand. So again, we can know that God created the universe, and we have no idea why he did it the way he did, right? So, and for people that might be satisfying, but we go further because I think philosophy of God helps here. And one aspect of philosophy of God, again, something that we can know about God that's relevant to this question, is that God is eternal. God is strictly timeless. Now, how does that sort of help with this question? Well, it doesn't show exactly why God used the timeline that he did, but it alleviates tension because God didn't wait to do anything, right? From the classical theistic perspective, sort of all moments in time are simultaneous and present to God in his eternity, right? So it's not like God kind of pushed things into that first initial state of motion and has been riding along with them the entire time. No, the analogy that's often used is you think of God sort of in this perfect intuitive insight as an author that can create an entire story and be present to every page, every word on that story sort of all at once simultaneously, right? So with God's eternity in hand, I think that's going to go a long way to alleviating this objection because I don't want to say that God lacks patience, but he doesn't. Certainly, a timeless God wouldn't need patience, right?
Yes, and no, I think that's a good way of putting it. And the way Dr. Craig has put it is that the long time period is really only an issue for a being who has limited time or limited resources and needs to work really hard to do something. But that's not the case with the God who's eternal. Yes, he could have made things along a faster timeline. But one of the things we were kind of getting to, and I know you've talked about on some of the other office hours we did with the fine tuning of our world, is that it's at least possible or plausible that God used this unfolding of the universe over billions and billions of years because that's the way to fine tune things to eventually get humans to emerge on this planet in this way through a process of theistic evolution down the road. Now, I'm not saying you have to dogmatically accept that, but I think when you study the different aspects of these constants and quantities and how they work, and how if the gravity is shifted ever so slightly, the universe just slams in on itself, or it shoots away from each other, and you don't get stable planets. When you kind of look into some of those interesting phenomena, you find out that it's at least plausible that you kind of needed this sort of a timeline to get this sort of a universe to eventually get these sort of beings to show up on the scene. So not saying that you have to hold to that, but it's at least plausible. And with God being eternal, we don't have to worry about any threat of him being bored or not powerful enough to create the universe.
Yeah. I want to say two quick things about that. One is that, yeah, given commitment to natures and essentialism, some people might think that the sort of our origin story might be part of what's essential to us, right? So if that's the case, then it to say, well, why did God kind of bring us about this way? It might be the case that if he did it some other way, it wouldn't be us, if that makes sense, right? That might be the case. Again, and we don't know God's mind on this, but these are some plausible suggestions here. The other one that I find in other ways more interesting is just going back to the notion of God, the nature of goodness, and the goodness is self-diffusive, right? And this is what has caused many traditional philosophers to posit really a sort of hierarchy of being. Now, before in the tradition, this wasn't considered through a grand sort of evolutionary timescale, but I think it fits really well with a grand evolutionary timescale. That God is interested in cool things and aesthetic diversity, right? And you cannot tell me that the origin of our universe is not supremely cool, right? I mean, even just like a 10-minute YouTube video of some of the unfoldings of our universe is just marvelous, right? It's marvelous. The cooking up of the elements and stars, the explosions, the formation of the planets, the evolution of life. It's so cool, right? And it sets the stage for intellectual investigation in science, another really good thing. So there's a lot of good things that God would know are good that are sort of, yeah, you sort of would need a time scale like this to have those goods in place. So I think there's many good reasons why God might have done it this way. And I don't think it is just one reason. I think there's probably a ton, and many that we probably have never even considered as well.
Yes, I do want to move on to the next objection just with our limited time, but I'll just give a nod to Robin Collins, who's done a lot of work on the fine tuning, and in his earlier work was just on establishing the fine tuning and arguing philosophically, but his work kind of shifted, and at some point he started to argue that, well, honestly, the certain conditions actually set the scene for discoverability, for even having a universe where people can search it and look into it and try to discover its intelligibility. You need it to be set up a certain way. I mean, the most crude example, if you imagine everything was just created, 20 minutes ago with the appearance of age, like, okay, maybe that might be open to the divine power, but it's not really a rational way of doing things, because then we're not able to probe things and really understand where they came from. They don't have, a good authentic history behind them that they could be understood. So I think that's just another point that people can look into further, but we should move on to the next one.
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So the second one is definitely more theological, and I think there's kind of two objections lurking behind it. But it says, why did Jesus ask his disciples to leave their families behind? Why not select people without a duty to their spouse? And I think the objections lurking behind this question are, one is kind of an ethical one. Well, hey, wait a minute. Don't spouses have duties to their husbands and wives? And then the second one is just, isn't this kind of surprising and maybe even against the commandment of loving one another that Jesus issues to people when they should be pledging themselves in that covenant of marriage, and then he's telling them to run off and to follow him. So I think there's those kinds of objections there, and I think we can handle it both from a perspective of getting into some of the New Testament data, but then also handling the question of ethics. And if this is an objective duty, like we theists love to say, how can Jesus tell us to break it? So I was kind of punt to you, Pat, on the ethics aspect of it, and then maybe I could offer something by way of some New Testament data, how we might think about this.
I think it certainly does. Right. So, from a traditional natural law perspective, right, we think our sort of obligations flow from our nature, right, and our sort of pursuit of happiness. But certainly in the Christian perspective and the religious perspective on this, there is no greater obligation than the obligations we have to God, right? So under ordinary circumstances, abandoning your family, not a good thing. If God incarnates, right, comes before you and gives you a command, these are not ordinary circumstances, right? So I would say it's just sort of inappropriate to try and run the usual moral assessment when indeed you are sort of receiving a direct command from God himself. Now, people might question whether that is a direct command from God himself, but we're assuming under this context it is. So that would just be my sort of opening gambit.
Definitely. Yeah. And we would assume that, you have sufficient evidence that, this is God incarnate asking you to follow him. It certainly is an extraordinary situation. I think that's a great point. With the apostles themselves, when I first read this question, I was thinking apostles, but then I wanted to broaden it to disciples in general. I really only know of evidence that Peter was married. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, if they're watching this, but he was one of the 12, and we know he was married because there's a story where Jesus goes and heals Peter's mother-in-law. So that's how we discern that Peter was married. But for the other 11, they very well could have just been single men, working men that were called into the line of duty to become Jesus' apostles. But what's really, really interesting, and I know it's kind of a let's see, an artsy retelling of the events, but it's really, really good. I want to commend to people The Chosen, is a recent film series that goes through the New Testament and tells the life of Jesus. And they do a great job with this part about Peter, because you see interactions between Peter and his wife. And put yourself into the mindset for a moment of a first century Jew who prays and is devout and loves God. Let's say Peter's wife is like that. They would have known from certain prophecies in Daniel and certain things that unfolded in the New Testament that there is a promised Messiah, not just Daniel, Isaiah. There's a lot of places where the Messiah is promised, but Daniel gives us a certain time frame. So that time frame around that first century, people were kind of pregnant with expectation that there's supposed to be a Messiah that comes and remedies things and fixes things. And there's different criteria for what this Messiah is going to be like. Some people think he's going to be like a warrior king. We also think he's going to suffer like the suffering servant in Isaiah. He's going to do all this different kind of stuff. And they're anticipating this as Jews. And so what happens is, suppose that Messiah walks onto the scene And suppose, you kind of put yourself into that mindset. You're Peter's wife, and Peter, your husband, has just been called by who you believe is truly the Messiah. And not only that, he's given you evidence that he's truly the Messiah. He's come to your home. You might have seen him do miraculous things, but he's come to your home and he's healed your mom. What happens in The Chosen is you see it so clearly, and you can totally view it as a plausible model that not only does, yes, Jesus does call Peter and takes him away from his wife, but she wants him to go. She truly understands that there's something more important here and that this is a divine mission. And she recognizes Christ as the Messiah, and she wants him to go. And the final thing I'll just say is that in the Catholic theology, marriage is in this life a temporary good. It's supposed to signify the eternal marriage where Christ is the bridegroom and we are his bride. So we'll
Right.
all be, quote unquote, like married to God in heaven. But the particular marriages that we enter in this life as signs of that love are indeed finite and temporary, and will one day pass away, not into something lesser, but into something greater. So I think that's how we can look at that from a perspective of extraordinary circumstances and wanting to follow.
Yeah, I want to just add one quick thing to that, and that was beautiful, John. I said abandoned before, and I don't think that's the right word in this context. When you think of abandoned, you think of a sort of a deadbeat dad. That's certainly wrong, right? It'd be more like a father because rights and duties are always sort of hedge against each other in different circumstances. It'd be more like a father who goes to a just war, right?
Yes.
That's a better way to think about it. And like, what is Christianity committed to? Well, spiritual warfare, right? And you have the ultimate commander, right? The Lord himself calling you to sort of be his general, right? Yeah, your wife, might be sad that you're going to go, but a good, holy, understanding wife is going to support that decision, to be sure. Right?
Yeah, and one of the things there's a lot of stuff we don't know. One of the things I would be curious to find out, Lord willing, we get to heaven, can ask these kind of questions. I'd love to know if Peter and his wife, who knows, they might have had contact again during his earthly ministry. We don't really know what happened to that, but I think we've certainly said enough here to kind of diffuse any objection lurking behind that one.
Right.
So question number 3, moving on, and we'll try to go briefly through this one so we can have more time for the last two. But sure, the church isn't perfect, but they've started like hundreds of wars based on religion and killed so many dissidents of the faith. This is just kind of startling. And I think the objection is, if it was truly the church that Jesus founded, then we wouldn't witness this kind of activity. Does that kind of sound right of where the objection is going?
I think that's it. And the first thing to say about this, and this is just sort of the, I guess, colder direct response, is that, look, you sort of assess a model based on what it predicts, not what it doesn't predict, right? And then the question is, does the church predict impeccability? And the answer is no. No, it does. No, it does not. In fact, as John will argue in a minute, it does predict the opposite. In fact, the church might predict indefectibility, right? And it does predict. And I would argue that's a successful prediction, right? We have confirmatory evidence of that in favor of Catholicism, right? Impeccability being like moral impeccability. Everybody is just going to be a complete saint in the church. Popes, bishops, priests, us, lay people. No, that is not one of the core promises or predictions of the Catholic faith. It does predict indefectibility, that the church will preserve the essential truths of faith and morals, despite the horrible sin of the world and people in the church. So this one, I think, is just intentionally or not, it's just a red herring, right? It's just not relevant to what the Catholic worldview would lead us to anticipate. And in sort of an inverse and somewhat sad way, in fact, the Catholic worldview would lead us to anticipate sinners in the church that do what sinners do, right? So go ahead, John.
And if you had to make a probability prediction based on that, he called 12 apostles, and one of them is the son of perdition who betrays him. I mean, you're looking at 1 out of 12. What's that, like 8.5%, something around that, of the apostles that Jesus called, betrayed him and turned him over to the Romans, and he was eventually crucified. So what do we have here is, like you said, a prediction that there's going to be sinners in the church. There's going to be bad things that happen. With regard to the wars issue, I do have a little quote from my book, One Less God Than You, that I was going to read because I have a question that a chapter on religion is the cause of most wars and violence. And I just looked into a citation on this, and it says, in their Encyclopedia of Wars, Charles Phillips and Alan Axelrod maintain that only about 123 out of the 1,763 wars in history were religious in nature. That amounts to about 7%. So the vast majority of wars were not religious in nature. And this can kind of turn the tables on some skeptical claims. I think, and just us in the 20th century, we saw what Marxism did in so many places and how it ravaged the world in such a scary way. I mean, you read about, I mean, obviously people know about the Soviet Union and those horrors, but even like Cambodia and these other places where totalitarian Marxist regimes, which sometimes were often very committed to atheism, but just really laid 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 violence on so many people in such a horrible way. So what we have to say is, no, it's not that the church isn't perfect. It's not impeccable. We predict that. And some of these citations that get thrown around on the fact that religion is the cause of all or most of the wars, they turn out not to be true on more sophisticated examination.
Right. And the point is, I don't think it's right to just sort of like argue in terms of like statistical comparison. You make the first point we made first and say this is the principal point, but let's also get a sense of perspective while we're at it, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
like religion, what's the Chesterton quote, right? He says, even if you think religion is a crutch, it's if you need a crutch, it's good to have it. Don't kick it away, right? So
Yes.
it might just be the case. Yes, there may have been, any number of religiously motivated wars. Not that there may have been, we know there have been, right? But look what happens, and look what has happened as the sort of those restraints, those religious restraints have loosened. So
And because of the indefectibility of the church too, you can always look to the holiness of her saints in every era of the church. If you want to be inspired, like if you're depressed looking at some bad things the church has done, and Lord knows, we're all sinners, and the church has let sinners do a lot of bad things in different situations, but you could still find in every era, you can find those saints that are inspired and are conforming themselves to God and living lives of holiness. And I think to not just focus on the bad things, but also check out some of those great things that were being done. That'll kind of help you have a little bit more solace with this.
yeah, and not only that, one more quick point. We talk about like what is predicted, what is not predicted, and in case somebody's worrying, like, oh, are you just being ad hoc and making your sort of worldview unfalsifiable? No, we're not. We're clarifying what the Catholic position actually is, and we need to do that because nobody should want to object to a position. Nobody should want to reject a caricature, right? And just to give you an example, what would be a sort of falsification event? Well, say this is the example I like to give. Say there's a Vatican III, and the Church in all of her authority renounces the Trinity, right? That to me, I would have to throw my hands up at that point and be like, look, the church predicted this would never happen. It did happen. Now we're in real trouble, right? So it's not out of conceptual possibility that you could have I think a quite clear falsification event. I would just argue you just don't have that or anything like that, and which is actually really strong evidence that the Catholic paradigm is the correct paradigm because of the successful predictions it makes. And once we clear up what the church predicts and it doesn't predict, a lot of these objections, although they're important, like I don't want to downplay violence at all, right? Don't get me wrong, right? Violence is bad, poor, bad, right? But we're just trying to get things right. We're trying to do philosophy here. So hopefully it doesn't come off as too cold, but it is important we try to think straight on these matters, right? Mm-hmm.
Those are great points to kind of frame things. And I'll link, maybe you can link, Pat, and I'll link to, I did do one episode on the Crusades with Steve Weidenkopf, so that's a common issue that gets brought up. And I'm going to do another one on the Inquisition as well. Like, these are just common issues. Go to Catholic.com, you get some more detail on those. But let's go to question number 4 here, which we'll again deal with briefly, and then we'll probably spend a more chunk of a time on question 5, which is the toughest one, dealing with hell. But question 4 is, why wait 280-ish thousand years to send Jesus? And why not spread Judaism outside of Israel and just send it to the chosen people? So This is kind of a very specific theological objection. It doesn't say argue anything that God doesn't exist or that Jesus isn't worth following. It's more of, as I see it, questioning or again, bringing up that idea of maybe it's weird or strange that God did things in the manner that he did. And then maybe in a stronger form, there could be an objection that it's not fair that he did it in this way. And those who never practiced Judaism or never had a chance to meet Jesus, it's not fair that they're just lost forever.
And
So either,
that's the
yeah,
way
that,
I'm reading the objection. It just is everybody who came before or was sort of outside of Judaism. Is it just hopeless for them, right? So it sort of seems to me to be sort of a moral objection, right?
okay, that's how you took it as well. Yeah,
Mhm.
and we can clarify with Stuart, but that's kind of what I figured was in the back of my mind. Because if it's just the strangeness aspect, yes, we can get over that. Some things about how God does things will be strange, and you might even be able to find. I know we're going to get to this. We didn't have time to get to this today. There are actually some kind of really cool, timely reasons why Jesus did come at the moment that he did, both having to deal with fulfilled prophecy and also the arrangement of civilization at that time. But we're going to have to put a promissory
Also
note on that.
before a population boom and all these sorts of things, right?
Yes, yes. But let's deal head on with the moral objection. But first, I would say, and by the way, 280,000 ish years. I don't know exactly where Stuart got that number, but it's an interesting number. And people have put the possibility of Adam and Eve, our first rational parents, anywhere from 50 to 100,000 years ago. And then recently, I will plug Dr. William Lane Craig's book on the historical Adam and Eve is a very good book. So there's two kind of trains of thought in Catholic theology that affirms a theory of evolution right now. There's the Dr. Kenneth Kemp hypothesis, where our first rational parents some of them may have interbreeded with non-rational anatomically modern humans with which they were reproductively compatible, and that's how we get a wider amount of genetics that gets spread down to us. And so that's why Adam and Eve only had to be, let's say, 50 to 100,000 years ago. But other people who want to avoid that interbreeding at all, if you find that problematic, there's a Catholic gentleman, Dennis Bonnet, or Dennis Bonnet, Dr. Dennis Bonnet, and then also Dr. William Lane Craig. In his recent book, he actually does push Adam and Eve further back and says our first fully rational parents were about 500,000 years ago, or maybe even a little bit more. So Stuart's number here is not outlandish. The number is not the most important thing. I just want to point out, yes, Catholics have different models for talking about how Adam and Eve, our first rational parents, can interact with even long timelines. But let's get to the objection head on, and I'll try to do this as brief as I can. Why just pick Judaism or Israel and then do that for so long? Well, first, I would say God has a reason for conveying his message to a chosen people for a special purpose. And that's because he wants to show that being in a relationship with God and divine friendship is something very, very special. And as Thomists, we hold that it's actually gratuitous. God was not required to bring us into divine friendship, but he does that by a gratuitous offering of his grace. So I think it's fitting that he has a chosen people, both in the old covenant, and I'll get to this in a second, and then even in the new covenant, we're spoken of as a chosen people. But what we find out throughout the Bible is that it's not that only the people inside this small circle in the camp have a chance to be saved and everyone else is gone. It's not that way in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. We get a trajectory eventually getting into the new covenant where Jesus says, preach the gospel to all nations, teaching them to follow all that I've commanded you, making disciples of all men from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. That's what it says in Revelation chapter 5. So we get a picture and a trajectory from we kind of get a fittingness of the fact that Israel is an icon, that God always has a special chosen people, but that eventually is intended to spread out to all people of the world. And I'll get real specific in a second. In the Old Testament, you can find people who weren't Israelites, but who were commended for their faith. And a great example of this, and you can find her commendation, comes in the letter of James, chapter 2, when Rahab is praised for what she did to get the Israelite spies to safety in the Old Testament in the book of Joshua. But Rahab not only was she a prostitute, according to my mind, according to my memory, she was a prostitute, but she wasn't an Israelite. And yet she's praised for her faith. So that's kind of a sign that it wasn't just the circle of where you draw the tent up and where you draw the community, but rather God gives sufficient grace to all men to be saved, and people can choose to respond to him or not. And yes, there's an icon of, yes, chosen people in the old and the new covenant, but ultimately that's because we're all chosen to have this incredible relationship, which we didn't deserve and which he didn't have to give us, of divine friendship. But we are not required to believe people outside the camp are lost. In ways known only to himself, God can offer sufficient grace to all men, and they have the chance to respond in their own way at their own time to that grace. And if they so respond and cooperate with it, then God is not bound by the sacrament, or sorry, we are bound by the sacraments, but God is not bound by the sacraments. He can save them too. So that's kind of a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's my 2 cents.
It's great. I know we're short on time, so let me just say a few quick things, and we'll tackle the last one. Going back, picking the flashlight up. What can we know? I think either with certainty or a high degree of confidence, just through the light of reason. Well, God, works with things according to their nature. I think this is an important. This actually will bear in on the next question too.
Yes.
And we're not just, so God is not just a creator; He's a governor, right? And He's perfectly wise. He's a perfectly wise creator and a perfectly wise governor. He sets natures in operation. He's going to govern things accordingly. He can make the occasional donkey talk, but most of the times He's going to govern donkey according to donkey nature, right? What's human nature? We're rational animals, but we're animals, and we're social animals. We're dependent animals. We're animals that really are interconnected to one another in just so many important ways. And that's a good thing, right? Because this interconnectedness, I want to say, it gives us the opportunities to develop these loving friendships that will eventually make us able to conform to the life of the Trinity, right? So Richard Swinburne actually talks about this in his book, The Existence of God, when he's talking about the problem of divine hiddenness, of how many goods there are, even in allowing for agnosticism, right? Of how this can help sort of build these communitarian aspects and the goods and evangelization and addressing concerns and caring for people and preaching the gospel, right? And if God is going to work with things according to their nature, something like religion that is, of course, founded upon community and indeed institution, authority, hierarchy. Well, it has to start somewhere, right? Has to start somewhere, right? But it's good. It's good, right, that God does it this way. And it's good because it fits. It's fitting with human nature. And then if you have concerns beyond that some people might not have, made the cut, well, Catholic teaching just denies that everybody receives sufficient grace, right? So even though there's the sort of normal, ordinary way, we can trust in God's providence that no matter where anybody was at any time, God gave them everything that they needed to be saved, right? So yeah, very good, John. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if the lurking objection is that it's not fair for all those people who weren't Jewish or never met Jesus because they were lost, we would just deny the premise. In Catholicism, it doesn't follow that those people were automatically lost. So let's go on to the toughest one in question number 5, Pat, and we'll deal with this as best we can, and we can link to resources as well as. But I'll kick it over to you in a second. But the question is, why torture people for all eternity in hell when God could just not create hell? And the first thing that came to my mind when I read that question was to clarify the torture word and the model of hell that we're thinking about, and go to the catechism, where we primarily want to think of hell. Not to say that, it's impossible that torture is even an appropriate word to use. Not to say that that's definitely not an appropriate word, but the more classical way of thinking about hell, or at least the way I like to think about it, and this catechism says, is a separation from God. That's kind of the model. That's what hell is. Hell is the place or the state of being where souls are separated from God. So that's just a word clarification, but we can go a lot of different directions with this. So I'm going to kick it over to you
so
how
is,
we might
is,
proceed.
Is hell a sort of arbitrary torture dungeon, right? Or is hell a state? This is another way to think about it, right? And the traditional view, well, I mean, go back to Milton's Satan, right? I am hell, right? And hell is wherever I am. It's a powerful statement, but it's a clarifying statement. So we got to back up here. we gotta back up, and I think we gotta clear up a number of potential assumptions or confusions that can lead to this being an objection rather than just merely a question or something that we know can be the case, even if we don't know how it's the case, right? So what's this? Okay, what do we think God is ultimately aiming for? Well, we think that God is love. The inner life of God is a Trinity. And God creates because God is love, and he seeks friendships, love, and communion. What does that require? Well, love requires the uniting of two wills, two independent free wills, right? If it's just one will dominating another, then it's not love. Now, getting deeper into the metaphysics, and John, I think we've talked before, either on your podcast or mine, on what I call the sort of soft free will defense. I'm going to be building off this a little bit. What is the nature of God's will? Well, the nature of God's will is impeccability. Only God just sort of is subsistent goodness, just is the moral standard itself. So there's only and ever can be one impeccable will, one will that could never fail, right? To do what is good, because its nature just is goodness itself. That's only God's will. Anything else God creates, metaphysically, it's always going to be a composite of potency and act, which means it could always fail. It's finite. Any other created will that God creates by nature could fail. It could always not consider the moral rule in any judgment, as Maritain likes to call it, right? It could always kind of look away, conceptualize over something differently, right? It just could fail, right? So we might think that if God's going to sort of aim for this supreme good, which we all think love is, that there's a sort of risk that's entailed with that. That the risk of having friendships, love, and communion with God means bringing other wills into operation, and any other will but God's, including the angels, are fallible wills that could fail, right? That could fail, that could turn away, that could not consider the moral rule, and that could, over time, corrupt themselves, deeply, and perhaps, as the traditional perspective of hell takes it, even permanently. Now, if this is the case, then we can look to Aquinas, I think, for a potential model of how to think about hell. And what I want to say here is I've thought about this model a lot, and I think it's a very plausible model. I don't know if it's the correct model, but I think when it comes to how we should think about these issues, again, stick to what is clear. We know that God is perfectly good. We know that God is perfectly just, but it also seems very clear that God revealed that hell is a real possibility as well, right? So what we should do is we should take what is clear to motivate us to find some model that helps us to kind of square all those things, right? And I think Aquinas has a pretty good model here, right? Hell, as the Catechism teaches, is the definitive self-exclusion from God. Definitive self-exclusion from God. The chief punishment, which is the loss of the beatific vision. So again, getting clarity on what does the Catholic Church actually teach. Definitive self-exclusion from God. Chief punishment is the loss of the beatific vision. How could that be the case? Well, Aquinas thinks it might be something like this. And we can think about angels. Angels sort of know everything they know, at the sort of primal moment of their creation, right? They're not like us. They don't reason discursively. They don't come into new information that can cause them to change their minds. They don't look at information from a new perspective that can cause them to change their minds. So when angels kind of come online, they kind of come online with all the information that is pertinent to their decision to make their choice, either for God or against God. And once that choice is made, it's sort of crystallized, right? Why is it crystallized? Well, we can ask, well, what would sort of cause a being like that to change its mind? Well, it would either have to come across new information or consider the information it has from a new perspective, none of which is going to be the case in that instance. And this is why we think that their decision is sort of, it's an eternal willing at that point, right? That they eternally, perpetually will what they do because of, not really because of theology, but because of psychology. That's the interesting thing about this, right? Eleanor Stump is really great at talking about this too. Well, how does that relate to humans? Well, in this life anyways, we are sort of reasoning discursively, right? We're changing, we're evolving, we're coming into new information, new arguments, new perspectives. But the theory, the idea is that at the moment of death, we will have all the information that is pertinent, right? To make that decision whereby we sort of angelize, if that makes sense, right? That our intellect and will sort of angelizes, where after After that, the clay is sort of set. That's another analogy that's sort of used. The clay is being formed in this life, but at death, the clay sets. And it sets in a particular direction based on the decision we make, because after that, we're not going to be getting any new information, and we're not going to be considering the information we have from a new perspective, which means we won't change our mind. Now, that's hard for us. I grant that is hard for us to get because we don't have that perspective yet. We know this life. We know this life, right? But the question is that a plausible model? And does that help make sense of what we think we do know by reason from the different sources we have, philosophy and revelation? And to me, the answer is yes. Aquinas calls this the post-mortem fixity of the will, right? And then from there, if that's the case, then it seems like we can meet the criteria of what hell is in the Catholic Catechism. So I think that's seeds of a response to a very difficult and thorny theological question. I want to tiptoe here because I understand how difficult this is, but I think this is the better way to begin to think about this, of how hell can be something that we bear responsibility for, and that God works with things according to their nature. Could God, here's the thing, could God just perform a spiritual lobotomy on everybody, right? Just pump them full of so much grace? Yeah, that might be open to the divine power, but we don't just consider the divine power, divine mercy. We also consider the divine wisdom and the divine justice as well, right? And to me, God doing that is sort of no different than God just performing nonstop miracles all the time in other instances. And at that point, it sort of makes nonsense of creation to begin with. And God isn't in the business of nonsense, right? If he's going to create natures, then in the general run, he's going to work with things according to their nature. Will there be exception cases here and there? Yes, of course, right? Miracles have their place, but they are exception cases, not the general rule. So what I put out there, I think, are the different seeds that I think are really useful. They've been useful for me to help seeing how it does indeed. When I read honestly the fathers, the tradition of the church, the Catholic Catechism, it seems like this is something that has been revealed. And I also think by the light of reason that God is perfectly wise, just, and all these other things. So Aquinas' model is the best that I've found for thinking through this. And we should also understand that the nature of punishment and how we think about punishment plays importantly into this as well. But I've said enough at this point, John, so let's get your thoughts.
No, that was a great rundown, Pat, of a very plausible model. I think we should link to some things. I'm just making a note for myself, but Phaser's blog post series on the topic of hell from a Thomistic perspective, I thought was very helpful. I recently heard a talk from a Dominican priest at the Angelicum, who was defending what he called the Thomistic autonomy defense, which honestly is pretty much in line with your soft free will defense against a theory of universalism. And it's a very helpful lecture, so we can link to that. And then I just want to make 3 quick points, one of which will follow up on what you were saying. But the first one is this: just in case what was lurking behind this was like, why torture people for all eternity? Just in case what was lurking is like, oh, well, maybe God's doing it because he gets pleasure and he's all giddy about it and he's some kind of sadomasochist or something like that. Just in case some weird superficial thing like that is lurking behind some listeners, we would just say that's obviously ruled out of court because God is already perfect in himself. He doesn't gain any extra perfection from doing anything to creatures. What he creates and what he does is gratuitous, and it's for our goodness and for our sake. So that's ruled out of court. That's not a possibility. The 2 more pertinent points I wanted to make, which touch on what you were saying, and I love how you couch it as a plausible model. And that's to articulate, why do we affirm hell to begin with? And you kind of leaned into this when you said, do we have it on good authority and so on? If you ask us, why do we believe in hell? Like, do we just want people to go there, and do we just love the idea? And I think, in my case, I guess people or myself, the answer is no. I don't want people to go there, and no, I don't like the idea. I find it horrifying. But our Lord told us. We believe in hell because Jesus told us that it's true. And if we have good reasons to trust Christ and the church that he founded, then those are also good reasons to assent to church teaching on the afterlife, and then try to reason out plausible models as far as we can. But we don't have enough information to just deny our Lord if we already have good reasons to trust him. So that was kind of my second big point. Did you want to jump in there? Because I'm just going to...
Yeah, again, separate what is clear from what is unclear. The next life is very unclear for us. Why? Because we're not there, right? We don't have really a taste of that, right? What is clear, I think, to us is the sort of philosophy of God, right? I think the very great evidence for the core historical basis of Christianity, the resurrection, and indeed the authority of the Catholic Church. And it just seems clear to me that hell is one of these revealed data points. And at that point, I think the rational thing to do, if we go by what is clear and we separate that from what is unclear, is try to take the clear things and search for some plausible model to, connect the dots, right? And look, here's the other thing. Maybe you can't connect the dots and something just remains a mystery. Okay. But unless we have like a real contradiction or something, that shouldn't cause us to go back and reject our prior commitments or doubt what we already know. I think there are some issues. I don't think this is necessarily one of them, but I think there are a number of various things where a sort of Mysterianism is fine, is appropriate. So I'm just trying to go back to the principles we brought in at the beginning of the conversation, because look, things get difficult. They get difficult on many levels when it comes to, philosophy in general, theology, faith. So it really helps to have this kind of core set of principles that you can return to, so you don't spin yourself in circles, so you don't let difficulties become doubts. I think that was Newman, right? 1,000 difficulties don't need to make a single doubt. What a brilliant piece of advice I think that is, if you have these good principles in hand. So yeah, I don't know if I have any more to say.
We're going a little longer, Pat, than we said, but I had two more quick things. Do you think you have time? A few minutes?
Put them out there.
Okay. The other thing that's sometimes lurking behind this is, well, isn't God unjust or unfair to punish people for all eternity when the amount of sins committed in this life was finite, and thinking of that sort? And that gets to that would kind of deny the model that you're sketching out, because in the model that you're sketching out, it's not unjust or unfair. It's not true that the people who have their wills locked into this position, it's not true that they stop sinning or stop having their wills directed away from God. And two, it's actually even true. You could even set up this true conditional that if they wanted to get out of hell, then God would let them out. Right. Now, we know hell is eternal. That's not going to happen, but the antecedent is never fulfilled because of the postmortem fixity of the will. Mm-hmm. It's never true that they want to get out. As C.S. Lewis so aptly put it, the gates of hell are locked from the inside.
Right. And he also has this, this imaginative illustration of there's this sort of, there's this bus that will take you from hell to heaven whenever you want to get on it. But does anybody ever get on it? Right. That's what this model would say, right? If you're actually in hell, then it's not like, you don't think of God as a sort of cosmic bookkeeper, right? The objection, Eleanor Stump puts it this way. I think it's pretty good. It's that if you think that God is like, he's made a sort of accounting miscalculation, right? He counted up a finite number of sins and then affords an infinite punishment. And that just seems like, a mistake in calculation. That's the totally wrong way to think about it, right? First off, what is your state? What is the state of your soul, right? Where you really have willed against the good in a radical way, and you're doing it perpetually. So it's not like it was something that just happened and now you've changed your mind and God keeps punishing you. No, you keep doing it, right? Your will is fixed against the good, and hell is really God trying to will whatever goodness he can to a person who is in that state, right? And as long as you can make sense of punishment as actually being a good, which I think is how you should view punishment as a good. That's a hard thing for people to accept in modern society, but I think that that's the right view of punishment. Then yes, even in hell, God is loving those who have locked the door from the inside, as you say, John.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I want to add, that those are some helpful follow-up points, is that why couldn't you, like, even if he just made a world with no hell, why couldn't he just create that? And I think it's possible for us to postulate and speculate about a world with a species that might be rational, kind of like us, maybe didn't have exactly the same kind of freedom that we had and was a bit different, and maybe he did make them, and that was, and then he just kept them always with him, and they were born with a natural necessity to only ever be towards him. I don't want to rule that out of possibility as far as being open to the divine power that he made or could make such a race, but it wouldn't be our race, and it would be lacking certain kinds of goods that come with giving us that existential choice to enter into that divine friendship or not. And the way of kind of motivating that, because it might be kind of annoying, kind of hard to understand. I'm toying around with this pattern, so I'm still working on it. But a question that I've kind of come up with to kind of motivate this is, well, what would you think about a world where there were only ever arranged marriages? How would you like to live in a society where your marriage was arranged, and if it wasn't arranged by a certain date, then it was just like automatically arranged, that you had to marry this person, and it wasn't up to you in any way or something like that? What would you think about that kind of society or civilization? I might pose that to someone just for some food for thought, and I think a lot of people would not like it. I don't think a lot of people would like that if the only ever type of marriages were arranged marriages, and if you weren't married by a certain age, then you were just forced into it. I think that's almost what you get on a kind of necessary universalism, or on a postulated world where there is no hell. You get the circumstances where a person doesn't have the freedom of choice to enter into one of the most important relationships in their life. The most important one is with God. But with the marriage analogy, you can kind of see how there would be some goods lacking there. If people were never able to, try to court their spouse and, show their love for them first and offer that ring in marriage, knowing that they could say no and that this is something that they freely enter into. If that was never an option, it was just like, oh no, it's automatic. You guys are getting married, no matter what. I think it's easier to see how there would be some goods missing, and if those were the only types of relationships. Now, of course, God can do special things. He does special things with the Blessed Virgin Mother. You've talked about it in other circumstances. But one, if he was doing it with our race, it would have to be perpetual miracles, and that would be inappropriate. And two, if he were to make that sort of a world where every marriage was an arranged marriage, we can start to see how we're missing out on some really, really important goods. So I'm still working on that thought, but that's something I thought that might motivate some of our answers here.
Yeah, excellent. I like it. I just want to reiterate again that these were all great questions, and boy, if all my confirmation students had questions like this, don't get me wrong, they're a great group of kids. I would have to ask for a raise from $0 to at least 50 cents. Gives us a run for our money here. But I hope that some of our responses and the ways of thinking about it have been helpful, because, admittedly, we haven't been hyper specific about some of the answers, because I think, again, it comes up to this fundamental issue of, it's not even really an issue, this idea of, should we even expect to see the reasons why God does certain things this way rather than that way? And I think a lot of times the answer is no, we shouldn't expect to see that. But that doesn't mean we can't know other things, and that we can't take what we know by those things and use that as a light, right? To try and find more truth, find clarity, or at least alleviate tensions, and just let questions be questions.
Yeah, no, Pat, this was awesome. Thank you so much for doing this other Office Hours episode. Thank you to Stuart for sending in these awesome and super interesting questions. I hope they spawn just the a hunger to do theology, to dig into the Catholic intellectual tradition, and for more confirmation students to be like you're being, Stuart, and to be like that, and just think of good questions and seek answers. Don't assume because one person you talk to didn't know how to answer it that there is no answer. Like, dig into that tradition, dig into those ideas, and you'll find that there's a lot more to Catholicism than sometimes meets the eye. But yeah, Pat Flynn, this has been fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure.